For joining us today for the launch of the International Energy Agency's State of Energy Innovation Report. I'm Julia Horowitz from the IEA's communications team, and I'm joined today by the IEA's Chief Energy Technology Officer, Timur Gul, and by Simon Bennett, the lead author of this report. The State of Energy Innovation is the first analysis of its kind. It provides a comprehensive global review of what's happening in the important world of energy innovation, and it identifies key challenges that are emerging. Based on the latest data from dozens of countries, it tracks recent technological advances and significant trends on policy and investment. As a reminder for those tuning in, the full report is available to freely download on our website, and we encourage you to take a look. During today's event, Dr. Gould will make some opening remarks, then Simon will present the key findings. We'll then take your questions. For those taking part in this webinar, we invite you to submit your questions via the Q&A function on the Zoom. You can do this at any point during the presentation. We'll also take a 2-minute break after the presentation for you to send those in. And with that, I'll hand over to Dr. Gould.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and dear colleagues, welcome to this launch event of our new report, a new IEA report, the State of Energy Innovation, which is a topic that is obviously very much in the spotlight today in an energy world where not everyone can fully agree to everything. There's one common denominator where I think everyone can agree to, which is that innovation, energy innovation is actually a good thing. Everyone knows intuitively, I'd say, that technology innovation is important for the energy sector, and indeed that innovation more broadly is good for the economy, our industries, and our daily lives. The fact that energy innovation is in the spotlight should not be a surprise to anyone. Innovation just simply cuts through too many important energy policy goals, from raising the competitiveness and environmental performance of existing industries to establishing and competing in whole new sectors, such as clean technology manufacturing, to improving supply chain security and resilience, to improving affordability of energy products and services, to facilitating energy access, and of course, to addressing climate change. But in energy, innovation is not only about breakthroughs equivalent to those that we have seen, for example, with a new cell phone or with a new touch screen or even groundbreaking materials. It's about a whole universe of innovative technology and product solutions. It's about experimentation and committing to a long-lasting race of R&D efforts and making the most of small but very often crucial steps along the way, accepting that many projects may or may not ultimately lead to successful commercialization with the impacts on the energy system that we have witnessed for those technology innovation success stories in energy, such as nuclear, such as solar PV, batteries, electric cars, and others. Such innovation progress is notoriously difficult to measure. There are no simple and easy metrics to quantify technology progress through the stages of their pre-commercial development. This is a problem because intangible progress does not easily get the attention of decision makers. And there's always a risk that innovation support is cut back at times of competing priorities, even if the underlying challenges of energy security, of competitiveness, of climate change, etc., even if they don't go away. Against this backdrop, we have developed this new State of Energy Innovation report that we are releasing today, in which we have assembled a large range of data sources and metrics to illustrate the importance of innovation, to highlight progress, and to identify potential action areas, all to assist decision makers in making the right choices today that can deliver on the key policy goals of tomorrow. As my colleague Simon Bennett, who is the lead author of this report, will show you in a moment, the report shows 3 important things in my view. It shows how energy innovation has delivered for key low-emission technologies like nuclear, solar PV, or electric cars, but also with pioneering work that was spilling over to other sectors of the economy and for wider macroeconomic priorities such as diversified trade balances. The report also shows how energy innovation is performing apart from the wealth of data and metrics across patenting, venture capital, R&D spending, and more, we identify some 150 innovation highlights from last year in our report, based on a survey of nearly 300 experts from around the world, as well as priority areas where we think some critical milestones towards commercialization are achievable within the next 5 years or so. The report, finally, as a third element, also shows how energy innovation can be fostered. We acknowledge, of course, that each technology has its own unique challenges, so there is no simple or single recipe to success. In fact, we do recognize that innovation requires time and patience just as much as it requires genius and finance. It is vitally important that decision makers remain tolerant of projects that do not turn out as expected, but nonetheless provide those important learnings that may facilitate the next step in the innovation journey. But there are important insights from our report, key priorities or areas of action that Simon will talk about a bit later, that we believe are important for policymakers to take note of as they look to bolster energy innovation. This new report is part of the IEA's ongoing effort to foster international dialogue and collaboration on energy technology innovation, which is a core mandate of the IEA ever since it was established more than 50 years ago. It involves our support to and collaboration with the IEA's technology collaboration programs, a platform that is organized in 38 areas of RD&D and involves thousands of researchers from all around the world. And it involves our effort in collaborating with other platforms, such as Mission Innovation in particular. More recently, we at the IEA set up a new Energy Innovation Forum, which was held last year in 2024 for the first time at the margins of the IEA Ministerial, that brought together 250 participants from 45 countries across 6 different continents to identify priorities for international collaboration on innovation and RD&D. And just this week, we held the inaugural meeting of our new Technology and Innovation Advisory Board with thought leaders from academia, startups and large corporates, investors and ecosystem builders, all as a platform to be even more proactive and more nimble in identifying new technology trends and for us to be able to give the best possible advice to governments. I would like to finish by saying that none of our work, and indeed the report we are releasing today, would be possible without data. As our executive director always emphasizes, in the world of energy, data always wins. And of course, technology and innovation is no exception to that rule. This is why the IEA has established numerous technology databases in recent years that are freely available on our website and that I invite you to explore alongside the many excellent ways in which the report is being presented. Those databases include, for example, our Clean Energy Technology Guide that tracks technology readiness progress for more than 600 individual technologies and components across the entire energy sector, or our Clean Energy Demonstration Project database, our Hydrogen Project database, our CCS database, and so on, all of which track projects from around the world. These databases have all been established to provide the much needed data and transparency that is critical for making progress on technology, RD&D and innovation, and indeed to design the policies that are needed to support them. Many of my colleagues from the IEA's technology team are working very hard every day to put together these databases, and I can only encourage everyone interested in technology and innovation to have a look at the details they provide. With that, I would like to hand over to my colleague, Dr. Simon Bennett, who will talk us through the key findings of the report.
Thank you. And it's very much in the context of what Timo just laid out that we are going to present our new State of Energy Innovation report today. For that report, as Timo said, we have assembled a range of data sources and metrics to illustrate the importance of innovation, to highlight progress, to spell out where are the bright spots and the good news, and identify potential action areas. And all of that is to assist decision makers in making the right choices today that can help deliver on the key policy goals of tomorrow. And these range from enhancing energy security to making energy more affordable, addressing climate change, and of course, air pollution. So I'm going to begin the presentation today with a reminder that the benefits for technology innovation for the energy sector and more generally, they often only reveal themselves in hindsight. And that means after successful commercialization. And yet the seeds are always sown earlier than that. Let me give you a few examples. Today, nuclear energy is a mainstay of global electricity generation. Much of it was deployed in the years following the 1970s oil crises, but that growth was fueled by research. In response to those energy crises, by 1980, IEA governments were spending nearly 0.06% of their GDP on public nuclear energy R&D. That's actually a higher share of GDP than they spend on all energy R&D combined today. But the benefit for the energy sector was tangible. Nuclear helped moderate oil and gas demand for power plants, and it helped to diversify energy use. At the other end of the spectrum of power generation, in terms of scale and accessibility, solar PV has become the cheapest new source of electricity in most countries of the world in recent years, driving its exponential adoption. In 2024, generation from solar PV rose by 480 terawatt hours, according to the Global Energy Review that the IEA released just last week, and that's more than the total annual electricity demand of Indonesia. Yet this outcome did not, as you might say, fall from the sky. The journey of modern solar PV from a first prototype in the 1950s to become the largest source of capacity additions was accompanied by continual innovation, and that's indicated here on the chart by the patenting that preceded deployment. So, yes, policies to support PV deployment, the massive scale-up of manufacturing and economies of scale in places like China, they've been critical success factors for the solar PV that we know today, but its roots are very much in innovation. And a similar pattern can be seen for electric vehicles and the oil demand that has been displaced. So we can see this after the inflection point for patenting, which is a proxy for cumulative invention. And we see that oil displaced has increased noticeably. And both PV and electric vehicles have built there on widespread private sector innovation efforts to capture market share, including in countries that were not actually previously major R&D hotspots. And the impacts of energy innovation do not stop, however, at the energy sector. Some R&D that was originally taken to solve energy challenges has found much bigger markets elsewhere and even created whole new industries. And it's perhaps not commonly known that the inspiration for the initial research into lithium-ion batteries was to counter the problem of storing variable renewable electricity, and that's something that was identified again during the 1970s oil crises. But 2 decades later, the first mass market for these batteries was in small consumer electronics, enabling the proliferation of things like smartphones in society. And only after the batteries were proven in those markets and costs had come down, were they then adopted in larger packs for electric vehicles and for stationary power storage, and the circle closed. They came back to being deployed for variable renewable electricity. Another example, which we can debate in terms of whether or not auto-tune in the pop music sector is of equal standing to smartphones and lithium-ion batteries, but it has become somewhat universal. And it's important to remember that the underlying technique was first developed to aid oil and gas exploration. Trade balances is another area where we see the fingerprints of energy innovation. The story of hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling for unconventional oil and gas, and it's an innovation story that spans several decades. The real impacts of that have been seen this century, and the United States has reversed its role in global markets and become the world's largest producer of oil and also a net exporter. Almost simultaneously, China, which is a country that imports around 3/4 of its oil needs, has focused on and benefited from innovation around electric vehicles. So in 2024, it imported 8% less oil than it would have done if all of those EVs on its roads had been conventional vehicles. Now, for many years, we could say that the main sources of new energy technologies were large Western economies in North America, in Europe, Japan, and more recently in Korea. And the patenting of those four major countries that we see here has been relatively high and constant over the years. But the latest patent data, and these only run up to 2022 due to unavoidable lags in data availability, they show that this view of the world no longer holds. In 2021, China's level of patenting rose to make it the world's top country for annual energy patents. And what's interesting that we see in the data is that the overwhelming majority of that is directed to areas that can be categorized as low emissions energy technologies. In fact, over 95% of all of its patents are now in those areas. And overall, low emissions technologies dominate innovation efforts according to the patent data today. And if we just look at the ones on the energy supply side, we actually see that the crossover with fossil fuel, unabated fossil fuel technologies was actually as early as the early 2000s. We recognize that patents are an imperfect measure of energy innovation for a number of reasons, but their trends are an important early indicator of priorities within countries and the direction of travel of innovation efforts. But we can also look at how these patents have been allocated. And one way to slice that data is to look at the blue and purple segments of this chart. And we've allocated to those technologies according to their unit size and their ease of mass manufacturing. And so to give examples, roughly speaking, smaller scale and modular technologies are things that are made in many factories worldwide and would include solar panels and fuel cells. And larger technologies are those that are assembled on site, and they're often only produced to order. And things like big turbines and major chemical plants would fall into that category. And we see here reflected the broad and the deep energy innovation system of the United States. It has many national labs, it has top research institutions, and its patenting covers the spectrum of technology types. We could perhaps refer to this as an all fuels, all technologies approach. And then looking at Europe and China, we see there is more emphasis on smaller and more modular technologies. And when accounting for the fact that many energy efficiency technologies also rely on small scale components, the share of modular low emissions technologies on the demand and the supply side in China is actually very high. But patenting tells us something about invention, and it's one thing to invent, but it's quite another to commercialize an invention. And one of the data sources that we can draw on to look at the commercialization is venture capital data. Now, venture capital is one way that finance is channeled to new ideas to bring them to the market. And looking at the data here, we see that the United States has a very large venture capital market, but also a diverse one. Investors there see the value in betting on it, entrepreneurs, also in riskier, larger scale technology areas, as well as the smaller non-fossil ones. And that diversity brings certain strengths. Many of the technologies that are needed to reduce emissions in key sectors will not necessarily be mass manufactured traded products. Innovators in those areas need accessible capital. But then when we look at China, we see that the venture capital funds that have launched new private companies in that country have concentrated on areas where China has developed a manufacturing lead. This targeted approach to innovation is part of the story of China's manufacturing success, especially around energy technologies. And it must be added that, venture capital is by no means the only way that technologies are scaled up in China. So we are aware that China also supports many innovative large-scale projects through state-owned enterprises and public finances. But the data is showing a relatively targeted approach when it comes to patenting and the venture capital. And with the wealth of venture capital data that we've been able to process, we can also look at the trends over time. And this shows that there has been some remarkable growth in the capital that has flowed into energy startups in the venture capital sector. And it's worth remembering, we've started this chart from 2010. It's worth remembering that back in 2010, 2011, there was much concern about the so-called clean tech bust. And many investors lost money on clean tech startups that were not able to find markets for their products at that time. But when you run the time series out to 2022, that bust was minor compared to the remarkable growth that has followed. And one of the The reasons that we saw such a striking change and an uptick in fortunes after 2015, I mean, they relate to the policy initiatives that strengthened market expectations. And so one of the things that happened, of course, in 2015 was the signing of the Paris Agreement. And then at the same time, continual cost declines for cornerstone technologies like solar PV and batteries raised confidence across different energy areas. And then from 2021, 2022, we had the very low interest rate post-COVID environment that drove more capital into the sector. But as we process the more recent data, we recognize that that story needs an update. Due to macroeconomic conditions, VC fundraising has fallen by around 20% for the last 2 years in a row. And in some areas, there might be reasonable cases for consolidation, perhaps in electric vehicle manufacturing. But overall, we see this as a risk for energy innovators. Looking at the data, we saw that over 1,800 energy startups raised equity in 2021 and 2022, and another 1,400 have raised equity since then. And if only a handful of those meet their scale-up goals, then they could have a significant impact on the energy system. But they will only scale up if they continue to have access to operational capital. We can also cut the data so that we can see what the sectoral breakdowns here. And one of the noticeable things is the role of mobility and storage in driving the growth up to 2022. But we also see that no sector has been spared from the downturn. There have been some bright spots, and in 2024, nuclear, geothermal, and CCUS are among the areas that actually raised more funds. Now, we have to recognize that different sources of funds played distinct roles in healthy energy innovation ecosystems. So we have to keep their relative sizes in something of a perspective. And public R&D budgets, which fund many of the innovations that are under development by startups, they continue to be larger than all global energy VC investing. But there was a remarkable thing that happened in 2022, which was that for the first time, the VC market increased almost to the same level as total global public R&D budgets. Now, when we take that out to 2023 and 2024, I think what's useful to note is that this is a reminder that as a source of capital, VC can be less reliable for the long-term continuity for funding for innovators if it is not complemented by stable and steady public R&D budgets. The final column on this chart for corporate R&D, and this is a reminder that there are other ways that energy technologies are invented, improved, and nurtured towards real-world impact. Corporate research and development departments still spend much more than public VC and public R&D and VC combined, but it's worth recalling that much of that is on the vital incremental improvements and product development in order to compete on efficiency and price in the marketplace. But corporations, large companies, they have another major role to play in one of the areas that we're particularly interested in, and that's the area of large-scale demo projects. And corporate support and funding can be especially valuable to bring these large-scale projects to fruition. Now, these projects are critical steps in the validation of technical, regulatory, and commercial aspects of new processes and products in many sectors. And they're often the product of combined public and private support, but they can run to many millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars. So we have a database at the IEA Demo Project Database, and we've been exploring the projects in that and the details about them. And we identified that around $60 billion has been earmarked for, made available for the projects in our database globally. And that's good news. That's well over half of the funding that countries pledged towards these types of projects a few years ago in Pittsburgh. But there are also imbalances, and only a minority of the funding has been earmarked for demand-side projects in important sectors such as iron and steel, cement and shipping. And yet demonstration of pre-commercial technologies in those sectors will be critical to any attempt to deliver on climate goals. And another thing that we've looked at in that database, because there are additional concerns today that relate to whether all governments will indeed stick to their announced budgets for these projects. And that is the number of projects that are already under construction and those that are not yet under construction. And 3/5 of the funding we identified is for projects that have not yet taken a final investment decision. And nonetheless, those projects are mostly targeting operation by the end of this decade, so just 5 years away. And 90% of the value of those of the final investment decisions that has been taken have been achieved in just 5 countries: China, the United States, Norway, Canada, and the Netherlands. But coming off that note of what needs to happen, I mean, I should turn now to the good news that I promised at the beginning of the presentation. And for this report, we conducted expert solicitations and surveys, including with the IEA's 38 technology collaboration programs and mission innovation missions. And the report and the accompanying website that you can explore, they showcase 156 technology innovation highlights from the past year. And these highlights manifest themselves in a number of different forms. And to illustrate this, perhaps the most obvious way to measure innovation progress is to look at whether these highlights have led to tangible technological progress. And that's something that we track in our online energy technology guide. In 2024, there were actually 65 updates to that guide. So the latest version now is fully updated with this new data. And those examples include, for example, the first trial of an ammonia-powered ship in Singapore. And that real-world technology demonstration represents tangible technology progress. Likewise, the first operating demonstration of an oxy-fuel kiln that enables cement production, potentially with CCUS, started operation in China in 2024. And experts in the field expect that that technology could achieve commercial deployment by around 2030. But there are also examples of innovation that represent other steps towards commercialization. So in 2024, we noted financial close for a major near zero emission steel making project in Sweden. And that's hopefully brought the market uptake for that technology within reach by the end of the decade. In addition, firm offtake agreements for small modular nuclear reactors in the United States, they may do the same in that sector. And there are some innovation highlights in our data set that relate to the launching of new products that are already close to commercialization. In 2024, the world's first car that's powered by a sodium-ion battery hit the market. And that raises expectations for a battery that's made using more commonly available materials and could be a potential complement to lithium-ion in some situations. Now, another way that we are encouraging progress and tracking progress around some of these projects and companies as they move towards commercialization, a contribution that we're making to that with this report is the introduction of 18 separate milestones that we've designated as international races. And these span a number of different policy objectives, from long-term energy security to environmental protection and core science that could generate technological spillovers. All 18 that we see here are detailed on our website with the associated criteria, and they will be routinely updated with project and company developments across 3 different phases. And to illustrate that, we see that our long duration energy storage race, and that shows that we have several competitors that are active in the first phase. And that means that they're building or operating projects that are smaller than full size or in a slightly different configuration. And then for other races, we have consortia that have already progressed to the second phase, which we've considered to be raising funds for an announced project that could actually potentially meet the full criteria. And in the case of nuclear SMRs, that criteria includes repeat deployment in more than one country. And then there are other areas where we already have projects that are in construction around the world and that have the potential to win the race if they get to completion in coming years. And if they do so, then that technology area will have passed through a key scale-up bottleneck, one that is essential if the technology is to have broader impact over the long term on energy and emissions. But as you can see from the range of different races that we have here, the range of energy technologies is extremely broad, and it's getting broader. So the tracking of energy technology at the IEA now covers techniques for extracting critical minerals, for example, from less concentrated resources. That wasn't in our technology portfolio for energy a few years ago. And it also includes robotic technologies that can reduce the costs of mass manufacturing of products. So to enable us to delve more deeply into the into the state of energy innovation, we could only select 3 focus areas for a closer look. And each of these areas is dynamic, it has competing options, and in some ways it's hard for non-experts to follow all of the things that they might read about them. Each of these areas features strongly this year in international deliberations and forums. The first area is innovation to increase the diversity of sources of electric vehicle battery minerals, whether from alternative resources, recycling, or entirely new battery chemistries. The second is the use of artificial intelligence to accelerate energy technology innovation, for example, by speeding up the discovery of new catalyst materials. And there has been impressive progress with AI-led discovery, but we note that there is less progress with speeding up the subsequent integration steps and in getting these into functioning products into the market. The third area is carbon dioxide removal. And here we record now 11 other approaches in addition to direct air capture and bioenergy with CCUS. And as an indication of dynamism in all these 3 areas, we see that the number of new startups that have been founded to commercialize these technologies has risen sharply in recent years. And so you will find 3 focus chapters in the report, and for each of those areas, we'll find descriptions of the innovation challenges at hand, detailed summaries of the latest technology progress, and proposed policy actions. And it barely needs to be said that each of these faces a very different set of circumstances and policy needs. And it's in some ways because of that diversity of policy needs and the particularities of sectoral and national situations that it's not possible to outline a single comprehensive recipe for policy action in the coming years. Yet we know that policy is vitally important. The energy system is diverse, it's marked by high barriers to entry, it includes high capital intensity, long lead times, safety standards, and the need for extensive physical infrastructure. But what we have done is we've compiled a wide range of recent policy measures that governments are using and testing for spurring the different phases of energy innovation. From this, and from a survey of 300 practitioners that Timo mentioned earlier, we've identified 10 broad areas to help to align the international community towards some common principles. These include raising all the sources of public spending back towards the 0.1% of GDP that was allocated to energy R&D in response to the energy security concerns of the 1970s and the early 1980s. But a complement to that sentiment is that effective policy is not actually just about money. I think that's relatively obvious, but it needs to be said that the most effective innovation systems that we see have a tolerance for initiatives and projects that don't work out as they planned and that they learn from them. Our work on energy innovation policies indicates that governments have actually really raised their games in terms of how they use funding and other tools to greater effect. And we've got a really good catalogue in the report of those examples. But with the pace of policy experimentation, there is ever greater opportunity for countries to share the experiences with one another. And the priorities that we put on the slide here also include actions to support innovation ecosystems in emerging and developing economies. And that's something that's extremely important for energy access, for resilient global supply chains, and for long-term prosperity of people in those regions. It's an area where the IEA has increased work in recent years, and we put out a dedicated report on the topic last year. But overall, we hope that with this report and potentially with future iterations, we will be helping policymakers and innovators alike to ensure that technologies find their way to the market in ways that are effective and that we can help enable governments to meet their policy objectives. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this presentation, Dr. Bennett. We now have some time to take questions. We invite those in attendance to send their questions in via the Q&A function on the Zoom if you have not done so already. We will now take a 2-minute break so those people who have not sent in their questions can do so. We'll be right back. Thank you very much to everyone who submitted questions. We have lots of great content to go through today. We received a number of questions on how AI is helping to accelerate the innovation process. On that front, I want to flag that there is a chapter discussing this in the report, and we also have a special report on energy and AI that's publishing next week. There will also be a chapter in that report that covers the role of AI in accelerating innovation. One question that we definitely want to get to is on Europe. The question is, it appears that the EU risks slipping behind in innovation, which was a message from last year's Draghi report. Do you agree with this, and what messages would you pass to decision makers in Brussels and other EU capitals? On this one, I'll pass to you, Dr. Gould.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. Maybe just to briefly expand there is a full report as was just mentioned on AI coming up next week, which covers both energy for AI and AI for energy, and indeed innovation is an important element. So we really encourage tuning in there. I also saw questions on databases and how to access them. They're all accessible on our website. Many of the things that you found in the slides just now are actually available. Our demo project database, our clean tech guide, etc., on our website. Now on Europe, maybe just to remind everyone that Europe has been for a long time a powerhouse on innovation, a global powerhouse, and it's still a major player across a variety of different energy technologies. What we showed here are the patent trends for individual countries, but it's very important to recognize that on aggregate, Europe generated over 1/4 of all patents worldwide for low emission energy over the last decade. So it continues to be an important leader in innovation. It's an important leader in critical areas, offshore wind, energy efficiency, power grids, steel making, various different others. It's also a region that obviously acknowledges the challenges and has been undergoing, and we know our colleagues in Brussels are working very hard on this. It's undergoing some very positive changes in its energy innovation system in recent years. It has attracted more venture capital for energy technologies and is working very hard to nurture this supportive startup culture. Our analysis, in fact, suggests that in 2023 and 2024, Europe had more early stage energy venture capital deals than the United States for the first time, and a similar number of growth stage deals. But what is important here, and this is, I think, where the Draghi report is pointing, but also our very own analysis here is pointing at, is a very important issue that comes with innovation. You can't talk about long-term competitiveness, neither of your existing industries, nor of those new and emerging industries, such clean energy technology manufacturing industries, without a focus on innovation. And the long-term focus here on innovation means that you prioritize effectively, even in view of competing priorities, short-term trends. Europe has a lot of benefits that it can draw upon, a large industrial base with leading companies where innovation is actually bread and butter of daily life. Think about the European chemical industry, how it has continued to be a global leader over time. It has also a tremendous capacity for coordination across borders on topics like standards, access to finance, and it also has opportunities here to think through value chains, technology value chains, in particular for those new industries that are emerging. And if you think about some of the successful examples in recent years, such as the manufacturing and batteries and electric vehicles here, integrating value chains, optimizing them in a way that leads to low cost overall production is an important area to prioritize for the EU. With that, back to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kuhl. We've also had a number of questions about key themes in the report. What are the best examples of successful international collaborations that have accelerated innovation outcomes? And what are the biggest threats to sustaining the current momentum in global energy innovation? We have a few questions on that front. Simon, would you be able to speak to those?
Can certainly have a go. So let's take the question about international collaborations to start with. And it's a hard one to pin down. Obviously the spread of energy technologies is very broad. We're aware of many initiatives around the world. I'm not going to necessarily pick on one of them, but we'll say that the IEA has for the last 50 years been very, very closely involved in international collaboration through our energy technology collaboration programs on energy R&D, and more recently with mission innovation. And the key thing in many respects is the longevity of some of these initiatives. The more successful ones in the international sphere have certainly been the ones that have been able to build relationships over a long period of time. It's also worth saying that energy technology innovation in many ways is inherently international and has been for a long time. We've done some work in previous publications around the co-authoring of patents across borders, and that's a relatively high share of energy patents. And when we look at the demonstration projects in our database, many of those are combinations of companies that are working or headquartered in different places in the world working together. And that's something I think that has been even more internationalized as we've seen some of these projects emerging in, one example is the hydrogen sector, where we have the resource base around renewable electricity in different places from where the technical expertise is. And we've got some really great examples of international collaboration emerging to help those to go forward. In the startup data as well, we also have some important examples of international collaboration, but there's some really key differences between regions in terms of where the flows of capital are coming from, and regions that are more reliant on domestic capital, domestic networks than others. So Europe and Asia are continents that we see as being much more integrated in terms of their collaborations with companies and with the investment community in general. The other question was around the biggest challenges that are being faced today, and some of those we certainly covered in today's presentation. I think Timur spoke a little bit about some of the macro trends that pose a threat to energy innovators today. Perhaps things like fragmentation of geopolitics, barriers to sharing knowledge as a result of that. But one thing that I would point to is that decline in venture capital money is just an indicator that we had, this wonderful, if you like, the most exciting portfolio of energy technologies that we've had for many, many years, coming to this scale-up stage altogether, and then some uncertainty in terms of funding, higher interest rates, a lack of venture capital, that is risking those being able to scale up and to actually be able to make their mark on the market. And I would point to that as a key challenge that government should look at.
Thank you very much, Simon. We have time for one final question. How do we keep white swans and black swans and the discovery of white swans and black swans on our radar that may have a high impact across the energy system, but may not currently be in focus? Dr. Gould?
Yeah, thank you. And I think we have many questions, and unfortunately we can't go through all of them because we're already well over time. And I would like to really encourage everyone, because most of these things are covered in the report, and I can only encourage everyone to read it. But the key thing about this is what we're trying with our databases is to provide as much data, as much transparency as possible into what's going on on clean energy technologies, on innovation, on technology developments, etc. So please have a look. We are trying to not to leave innovation just to chance. I mean, chance has a big role in this, if you're successful or not, but we are trying to get as much transparency into these developments of different technologies in order to help guide decision makers. If you feel anything is missing from our databases, a demonstration project, an improvement, etc., please do let us know. We are not saying that we have managed to collect everything, but we are certainly trying our best. And with that, I'm back to you.
Thanks a lot. That's unfortunately all we have time for today. Many thanks to Dr. Gould and to Simon, and thank you to everyone who's been following this event online for your interest in our work. As a reminder, the full State of Energy Innovation report is available to download for free on our website. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.